Welcome back to Hoops HD, everybody.
Woohoo!
It is Monday, February 12th. That means it is time for our weekly Hoops HD report. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood. We've got to my sides up here David Griggs and John Teitel. Down below me, Joby Fortson. To his sides, Matt Sikowski and John Stalika. And we've got a lot to get to. It was a very exciting weekend and week of college basketball. But before we do any of that, Griggs, I think it was your idea actually. We've started. We
Yeah,
have a new little feature we're going to break out this
a
week.
new little feature. I'm excited about this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take my bracket and we're just going to discuss the awesomeness of it.
Okay, now the real feature is that our John Titel
What?
is one of the top bracketologists under bracket matrix in the entire world. He is routinely way far up there in the rankings. And every week, John, you release your seed list, which then gets bracketed up. It's on the website, and it gets added into Bracket Matrix, which tracks all the major brackets out there and the like. Uh, we decided to give our panelists here a little chance to ask you a few questions about your bracket at the start of each show. And if this goes well, maybe we'll make it a regular feature every week. If it doesn't go well, then, this is the last time I was ever going to see it. Uh, but let me start here, John. We'll put your bracket onto the screen here. So this is your bracket, your most recent bracket, I guess we would call it. With one caveat that it's my understanding that this was actually what you actually came up with was the seed list, if I'm correct, and then it gets bracketed up after that. You don't actually do the matchups; you just come up with the 1 through 68 seed list, I believe I'm correct.
That is correct. And just to explain the timing, this is done early Sunday morning, so no Sunday games are part of this equation.
Okay, and just because it's actually you get some help with the actual bracket of the matchups, I could put a little note here just for everybody's clarity here, in case there are already bracketing mistakes. We know it's not your fault.
Oh, well, it's my fault. I guess.
But I'm going to throw it around here to each of
Wow.
you here for see if you have any questions. And Matt, why don't I start with you? Do you have any questions for John about this bracket?
Yeah, I was gonna do this is one for Indiana State,
Mhm.
and that so what happens if they lose both one more regular season game and a game in the conference tournament? Would they still be able to get it at large?
Excellent question. So let's focus on the schedule first. They got 6 games left. They're all against teams outside the top 100. So I expect them to win out, but anything's possible, as we've learned every day of the season. So let's break it down a little more. If they lose one of those 6 to a top 150 team like SIU or Murray State, they can still finish the regular season 27-4. And then if they make the title game and lose to a top 75 team like Drake or Bradley, they would finish 29-5. If they get that far, I think they make it. However, if the title game loss or one regular season loss is to one of the horrible Illinois schools with a losing record, then I think it's going to be a very nerve-wracking selection Sunday in Indiana.
Okay, Sleeka, you got a question?
I'm going to go ahead and point towards a team like Illinois right here. This is a team that's been rather fluid this year, mainly because of the Terrence Shannon Jr. situation. Can you please explain what considerations would be given for the games that he missed during the year?
So the way I understand it from previous interviews with multiple selection committee members over the years is that they do take injuries or suspensions or absences into account. So for example, the one notable game that he missed was their game at Purdue, which they lost. Would they have won if he was healthy and there? Maybe. He scores like 20 a game. He's a great player, but he didn't, and they didn't. So the committee says, well, we're not going to blame you too much, keeping in mind like any loss at Purdue this year is not going to be a bad loss at all. But they would say, okay, like the committee views the team as they are on selection Sunday and going forward, which, assuming Shannon can stay out of legal trouble for another few weeks, will be including him. And the committee would say, we're not going to penalize you for losing at Purdue without your best player.
Oh, awesome. I'll throw one out here, John. I see the one seeds that you have here were Purdue, Connecticut, Houston, Arizona. Which teams do you think are still in a hunt for the one seed from the final committee?
Sure. So the way I'm going to answer this is to break it down by 3 different groups of teams. So one group is whoever wins the ACC tourney title. If Duke or Carolina win out, That would mean they would beat their Tobacco Road rival in the regular season finale and possibly the ACC title game and finish 29-5. They both have the same record, so either of them could do that. If you're 29-5 and you have a pair of wins over your rival who's that good, I think you're in play. Secondly is the Big 12 tourney champ, because Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas are each top 15 in KenPom. They're all within one game of Houston in the conference loss column. The Cougars have not faced Baylor yet because of the unbalanced conference schedule, but they have already lost road games to those other two teams, and they face all three of them in the weeks ahead and possibly again in the conference tourney. So if any of those teams get on a roll, they're going to stack up a ton of tier 1 wins even before they get to the conference tourney, where of course they can keep stacking them. And then Marquette, ironically, for Matt's sake. So I saw UConn destroy Georgetown in person last Saturday, and they look unstoppable to me. So I don't think they're going to fall out of the 1 seed. That being said, the Golden Eagles have won 7 in a row. They have no bad losses on their resume, and they could end up facing the Huskies not once, not twice, but thrice in a 29-day stretch from the February 17th to March 16th. I don't think Marquette's going to win even 2 of those 3 possible games. But if they can beat the defending champs 3 times in 30 days, find me another team with a better resume than that.
I can't. I think you're dead on there. Griggs, do you have a question?
Yeah, sort of. This one's a little bit under the radar. I know you already talked about Indiana State, but there's some really good teams that we talk about every week that are sort of hovering around the 12-13 line. Samford is one. I don't think people they started off 0-2. One of those losses was to Purdue, and since then they've won 20 of 21. Grand Canyon also with a really bloated record. What's disturbing is last year we saw a Charleston team win 31 games, and while they didn't need the at-large bid, based on where they were seated below the first 4, it indicated to me that they would not have gotten it had they needed it. Could any of these teams get inside the bubble if they went out? Samford, Grand Canyon in particular.
I think so. I'm also going to discuss App State. So the
App
magic
State,
number
yeah.
we want to keep in mind here is the number 29, because the most wins for any team that's ever missed the tournament, 28. Coastal Carolina actually did it back-to-back years, 2010 and 2011. And then St. Mary's won 28 but missed out in 2018. Which is to say, if any of these teams get 29 wins, historical precedent says they're in. It's just a number, but it's a big number. So starting with App State, they got 6 games left. They're all against teams outside the top 125. If they win out and then lose the title game, they'd be 28-6. I think they'd still sneak in with 28. But your X factor here is it's one thing if they lose the title game by a point to a 31-win JMU squad who they already swept in the regular season. It's quite another if they lose to like a 10-loss Troy squad who already upset the Mountaineers last month. As far as GCU, they got 7 games left. They're all against teams outside the top 125. If they win out and lose the title game, they'd be 30-3. 30 wins, that's above the magic number 29. I think they have to get in, even if they get upset by one of the Utah schools that has a losing overall record. And then lastly, Samford, 6 games left, all against teams outside the top 100. If they lose the title game after winning out, they'd be 30-4. So 30 is above 29. I think they'd be in. The X factor with them is who they lose to. If it's to a good team like Furman, no problem. If it's to a VMI squad that's won exactly 1 D1 game all season, I don't know if we have to create a new like tier 5 to place that loss.
Joby, I think I'll go to you last year.
Yeah. John, this weekend, probably the biggest game for the bubble, and I'd say a bracket, is what the Zags did in Lexington. Of the 90 brackets on Bracket Matrix, you are one of only 14 to have already moved the Zags into the field, into the back of the field. I might add the J&G agrees with you. So I think that's pretty accurate. But they're right on the edge. Everybody knows Gonzaga. Gonzaga's in attention, for folks. What is the Zags ceiling if they went out with, getting some St. Mary's wins? And what is their margin of error? Because they are right now, in Dayton, even in your bracket, which is one of the best case scenarios for them.
So I'm glad Chad brings up the team sheet because this is where we want to dig into it. So the non-conference strength of schedule is great. Obviously, they did not win a lot of those non-conference games. They did beat Yale, but who hasn't this year? I'm kidding. Nobody's beaten them because Yale's actually great this year. As you mentioned, the St. Mary's road game on March 2nd to finish the regular season. If they win that, tier 1. If they beat St. Mary's again in the WCC tourney, another tier 1. As far as to answer your question, ceiling, so I have them as an 11 seed. I suppose they could work their way up to like maybe an 8 or something. That's where I currently have, I believe, St. Mary's. No, sorry, I have St. Mary's as a 7. But
yeah, bracket matrix now has moved St. Mary's all the way to Wofford 7 level, territory.
Well, maybe 7. I'd say probably an 8, just because they've got the signature win in Kentucky and they would have multiple tier 1 wins with St. Mary's. As far as the floor, missing the tournament, I mean, I don't know that they have to win out. I think that if they win these 6 left, which would include the tier 1 win at St. Mary's, then lose to St. Mary's by 1 in the title game.
All right.
Close, but I think they'll get in, but close. If they lose to like Pacific, I think we can start to put the nail in the coffin though.
One more quick one from me, John. What other teams do you think are in the best position to move up the seed list besides ones we've already discussed, like Gonzaga?
Sure. So I have an example of each. I have in my mind 2 different kinds of teams that can move up. One is the teams who have lots of opportunities for tier 1 wins because they're in like a power conference and have a bunch of tier 1 games left on their schedule. The other kind of team that can move up is that a team who doesn't have any difficult games left. So they're just going to stack wins, even if they're not tier 1 wins. So my example for the first kind of team who has lots of opportunities is Oklahoma. 7 games left on the schedule. 6 of them are against teams, not just top 50, but top 35. They get Kansas, Houston, and Cincinnati at home, and they get Baylor, Iowa State, Texas on the road. Even if they only win 2 of those are like tier 1A wins. So like, I think they have a lot of chances to move up. And if you lose on the road to Baylor, like, who's going to consider that a bad loss? Of course not. The other kind of team who can win out because they have no difficult games left, Nebraska. They got 6 games left. They're all against teams outside the top 60. They don't have to worry about Purdue or even a slumping Wisconsin team. They got Penn State, Minnesota, and Rutgers at home, and they get Indiana, Ohio State, and Michigan on the road. I don't know if they're going to win all 6, but they are 6 winnable games. And the reason they're going to move up the list is more that others might slide down the list and they're going to stay put or move up a little bit.
Well, I guess on that note, we should, if I can get a cat out of my screen here, we should move over. Let's move over to the results from this actual week here. We're going to start things. It's came up here. Let's start things off with the Big East stuff and what actually happened on the court this week. And there were some pretty interesting games. And maybe, Sleek, I'm going to actually start with you. Your Xavier Musketeers started crawling their way back into contention with a home win over Villanova, but home loss to Creighton. Did they just crawl their ways back right off out of contention here this week?
Well, the good news on Wednesday, at least Xavier showed they could win a rock fight against Villanova. I mean, that had to be excruciating for a team that likes to push the tempo. However, as we saw on Saturday, despite a good start, they might have wanted to scale back a little bit because every time they tried to push the ball in the paint, there was Ryan Kalkbrenner waiting for them to block a shot here, cause a turnover there. And there was a very bad 10-minute stretch where Creighton went from being about, I think, 6 down up until up 20 early in the second half. And even though Xavier was able to mount a comeback, they just ran out of time. And now they're going to have to start piling up road wins to really have a prayer at this point.
And Matt, you're a Marquette guy. Your Marquette team had a solid win over St. John's this week. I almost want to ask you more about their opponent, though. Where do you see St. John's? I think we just saw Titel had them. If I'll pull his bracket back up again, yeah, right there in the first 4 on the 11 line.
I mean, they look like a clear tournament team through about 36 minutes of the game. And I mean, they're up by 1.15 late in the first half, St. John's. I think the Marquette crowd, the Marquette quality, and Tyler Kolek playing like the player of the year, not just Big East, but in the country. Led Marquette to the win. But now St. John's looked like a really good team through about 36 minutes of that game. And I think right now I wouldn't want to be them. And I think they're right on the color. I think they're a little closer than a lot of bracketologists have. So I think Titel is smart to have him. He's either last in, last out. I think it is that close. But I kind of think they're going to play their way in. They got enough quality in that to where so you buy all that effort against Marquette for the first 36 minutes, they'll get them off the bubble.
I guess the good news for St. John's is they have two very, very winnable road games left. They haven't gone to Georgetown or DePaul yet. Uh, and we know that Griggs loves those road wins.
And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
they can get either Providence or Butler too. At least I think they get one of those.
Speaking of Butler, Joby, I
Well,
know
speaking of Butler, let's look at Butler.
Griggs has been championing them, but I want to maybe get your take on this Butler team here that has been streaking up a lot of seedless lately.
Yeah.
And had another nice win this week.
In the last
what they
3
got the win
weeks,
over Providence. Yeah.
in the last 3 weeks, Butler has gone. I'll just use the J&G because it's metrically done. They are on a bit of a roll in terms of seed list and moving up. They were in the 60s, on a seed list probably 3 weeks ago. Now they're at 40, which is 10 seed. They are one of these teams that has definitely played their way up, and by piling up wins this week could be. I don't think they get killed, even if they lose these games, as long
Well,
as they come
they
back
beat
and
them
win on the
both
road.
already.
But if they can sweep at home, two teams, one that is, as pointed out by Titel, could be even up to a 1 seed at some point, and another that I have is either a 4 or a 5. They're not just a 10 seed; they are well inside the top half of the field.
Titel, this conference also has the number one, still the number one team in the nation, UConn. You got a chance to see them when they came to Georgetown over the weekend, and maybe have some thoughts on the team they beat rather than the team that won the game.
I mean, they looked like the number one team in the nation, and we should spend 5 minutes on them, but I'm going to just spend about 5 seconds on Georgetown. So Coach Cooley started 7-4 non-conference play. They've fallen off a cliff since then, 1-11 in Big East play, barely thanks to a 3-point home win over DePaul last month. Offense is decent. Ask Stalik about the 91 points they scored at Xavier a few weeks ago, but the defense is frankly offensive. They're allowing 56% shooting inside the arc, one of the worst in the nation. I have a bad feeling that they're going to lose, that they're going to finish with less than 10 wins for the third straight year, which the other 2 years were not Cooley's fault. He wasn't here, but it's going to be a long rebuilding process.
Less than 10 wins. So they win at DePaul and they lose every other game, you're saying?
You are correct.
All right. I just, I know Villanova's been really up and down, and they get an easy team like Xavier later on at home. But sorry, Salika.
It's only easy if I'm in attendance.
Griggs, I'm going to pull Providence on one last team I want to briefly address. They had a heck of a week with the overtime home win over Creighton, but then they followed it up with a tough road loss at Butler, which
Yeah.
I don't know there's much shame losing at Butler, but when you need to move up and your profile has so many losses on it, it was tough for them to lose that game.
Right. And when you look at a lot of these losses, like very few of them are damaging. Really, none of them are bad, but it's just, sort of a death by paper cuts. I mean, when you get that many paper cuts, it's going to knock you down. I can't believe, and I want to say this, I didn't think Providence would be 100 miles with it, from the bubble at the start of the year. So I'm really impressed with what they've done. They've been so gritty. They've dealt with injuries. They certainly, coming off all of the drama from the offseason, it's hard to not be impressed with their grit. I don't even know what the other word is. And when you look at their upcoming games, the Johnnies, DePaul, they could win they could win the next 3. And if they do that, I mean, I don't know what Titel thinks. Aren't they inside the bubble or at least in the debate? I think they're right on it now. And they can play their way into this field. And if that happens, what an accomplishment.
Titel?
Yes, I do not think they're in today, but they certainly have a bunch of opportunities. Losing at DePaul or Georgetown would destroy those opportunities. Winning any of the other games would certainly help. So they're definitely in the debate.
Yeah, and Sleek, I think you want to follow up also on the Friars.
Yeah, I was also going to add they did not have Josh Oduro for the game at Butler, not because of an injury, not because of a suspension, but to be there for the birth of his first child. So he should be back for the St. John's game going forward.
We can put a little
The
asterisk by
NIT
that
is
one.
going to be turning into the ACC Big East Challenge.
Yeah.
Because you're talking Providence, St. John's, Villanova, Xavier, those are all going to be in the NIT if they don't move into the tournament. So we'll have a similar discussion when we get to the ACC's middle as well.
here's the week ahead. Huge week for Marquette this week. Matt, your team is at Butler and at UConn. Uh, we also want to throw in a couple other really interesting games here, including Xavier at Seton Hall, very bubblicious game. Creighton at Butler, important game for Butler. Seton Hall at St. John's on Sunday. So should be a fun week in the Big East.
Yeah, I think so. Some revenge for Marquette at Butler, but hopefully going into that showdown Saturday against UConn, the top 5 showdown.
But also, you don't want to be looking past Butler with UConn
No,
coming
but
up.
I think Butler snapping their long home winning streak will get their attention. It got to put some, but that Marquette hasn't lost since then, so I think they'll come into that one plenty prepared.
Joby, you mentioned the ACC. Let's just go right there next. This was a heck of a week for the Clemson Tigers, Griggs.
Yes.
And Joby, if you want to address them also, you can. But Clemson, I mean, they pick up the win at North Carolina and then followed it up. They no letdown with not an easy road trip to Syracuse. Syracuse, maybe not a tournament team, but still it's a quad 2 win. They go 2-0 though.
And I'm really liking this profile. I kind of think it's one of those teams like, why aren't they being valued a little bit more? I mean, at North Carolina, at Alabama, not an easy place to win. I think that's Bama. I think that's Bama's only home loss. So they should get a lot of credit for that. Am I right on that? Yeah, it is. So that is a phenomenal. I mean, those are 2 really high quality wins. And other than a home loss at Georgia Tech, which is, I mean, it doesn't smell the best. There is nothing else on this profile that's bad, and I think the good far outweighs the bad. One of their tier 2 losses is to a Virginia team that I really hope we're going to talk about them in a second, because I don't know how a team like, not to get away from Clemson, I don't know how a team like Virginia that has the history and the brand that they have can be 19-5 overall, 10-3 in a conference like the ACC on an 8-game winning streak, and somehow still be quietly sneaking up on everyone. That in and of itself is amazing, to be pulling that off and to still not be in the rankings.
Well, first of all, Virginia is now in the
they
rankings,
are in the
number
rankings.
21 and number 23 in this week's poll. Joey, you are a Virginia guy. Your thoughts on this 8-game winning streak? Because I think this is one of the hottest teams in the nation right now.
Yeah.
No offense to
I
St.
said
Mary's,
a lot of the piece last week, and it continued this weekend in Florida State. Not an easy place and a bad matchup for this Virginia team, and they still got the win on the road. That's a lot more impressive than the numbers will belie, given the past. And just as said, this is a Virginia team that, when they're a number 1 seed, loses in Tallahassee because of the waves of tall bodies that Leonard Hamilton can bring. Virginia, they did it even. They're starting to find their shooting touch. Groves is now in this win streak, above 50% shooting. Isaac McNeely is still one of the top 3-point shooters in the nation. And they did it even more importantly in both games, having foul trouble with their bigs. Minor, who has been the key to this 8-game winning streak, had to basically sit in both games this past week, had to sit the majority of time. And Blake Buchanan came in just as he did in Florida earlier this year and stepped it up on the inside. So they're getting the balance, led by obviously Reese Beekman, who will be the ACC's all ACC point guard and maybe defensive player of the year as well in the ACC. The team's gelling, and in the ACC, it doesn't, because they've passed that win streak, included Notre Dame and Louisville a couple of times. Now, for the most part, it's all challenges for there are decent teams they have to play, and then some really nice ones down the road. We'll see if Virginia can keep it up.
Okay. Well, their next opponent is Pitt, and Titel, not inside the field by any means right now, but you have a few thoughts on this Pitt team?
They started conference play 1-5, so I didn't think we'd have to talk about them at all this year, but they have won 5 of 6 with only a 4-point road loss at Miami. Tough road trip to Charlottesville on Tuesday. Good news, none of their final 8 opponents are named Duke or Carolina, so they got a legit shot if they can win a game or 2 in the ACC tourney. This could be a 22-win team. However, if we can highlight that non-conference strength of schedule, that is why they're not going to make the NCAA tournament. 347, God forbid. Senior Blake Hinson leading the team, 18 points a game and shooting 41% behind the arc. The future is bright for Jeff Capel because Hinson is the only senior on the roster.
So John, you're a selection committee guessing expert, and what you're telling us, I just want to make sure I understand you, is that 347 is a week out of conference schedule.
It is not great.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know if there's any other teams really worth discussing, quite honestly, especially after Wake Forest lost at Duke tonight. Had they pulled that off, I think Wake Forest profile became interesting. And let's just take a quick look here actually at the upcoming schedule for the rest of this week here. We mentioned Virginia's game.
Yeah.
Saturday's Vatek at North Carolina game could be a little bit interesting. Vatek has had some life at times. Meanwhile, what does Duke have? Duke has the road trip to Florida State on Saturday. Those are
Yeah.
probably the games worth watching. Of course, next Monday night, Virginia at Virginia Tech, always a good rivalry.
And as a Virginia fan, if there's going to be a slip up, that's the one. I mean, it is that is a Castle is a house of horrors for Virginia. So I fully expect the win streak to come to an end there. If not, a slip up against Pitt or Wake.
Matt, I know you want to do it. I'm going to give you the absolute honors of discussing them as we go to the Big Ten and discuss the 4-game losing streak by the Wisconsin Badgers, your least favorite team in the world.
Well, I will say, seeing that your Rutgers team blew Wisconsin out was a great start for National Marquette.
By 22 points. This was Rutgers' largest margin of victory against a ranked team ever. Okay, 22-point win over the number 11 team in the nation. Yes.
Wow.
Go ahead, Matt. The Wisconsin is no longer the Badgers; they are the Badgers. But go ahead.
Now, I will say, as much as I'd like to be throwing some dirt on their grave and saying, "Hey, they're in big trouble," I actually think they're going to probably be okay. It's one of those 3 of the 4 on the road. The other one was at Purdue, and while they weren't great road teams, they're all tier 2. So it's like this isn't. Hey, you just give yourself Q3 and Q4 losses that are going to landmine your profile there. You've probably knocked yourself down from the bottom of the 2, top of the 3 line down to the somewhere probably middle of the end of the 4 line, maybe a 5. I'll be real. That's a team I'm real interested to see what the what the actual committee does in the revealings on Saturday.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me that is coming up this Saturday. I think
they're doing it Saturday?
Yep.
For some reason, I was thinking it was Sunday. Okay.
Well, if you watch it on Sunday, you'll be watching it on tape delay, Griggs.
Live on tape delay. Live on tape delay.
Stalika. Michigan State, another team with an interesting week with a loss to Minnesota, but followed by a bounce back win over Illinois. So, are the Spartans good, bad, or are they just totally schizophrenic this year?
Well, if you want to talk about bad, that would be Ohio State and Michigan at the very bottom of the conference.
That's why we're not talking about them.
But I think as far as getting back to the Spartans right here, they needed some home cooking against Illinois, and at least they were able to hold serve in the Illini. This is a team that's going to be squarely on the bubble, also going to be looking for a decent road win themselves. And so I was going to say, so far, all that they have on their profile is Maryland. Usually that's not an easy place to win. This year has been the exception, but even teams like Penn State, Michigan can be a little bit tricky this year, but the Spartans are running out of room for error right now.
Yeah, I think they need to win both of those next 2.
Look at the rest of the schedule. Other than that game at Purdue, the only other tournament team they're playing is Northwestern, and that's at home. They need to dominate the rest of the schedule. Quite frankly,
I agree.
Especially because they have just so many L's there. 9 L's already. It's a lot. Titel, one of the teams that beat Michigan State this week was Minnesota. Is this team actually, potentially in the discussion here?
Ooh, they blew it.
They're 500 record in a tough conference, so the scary answer is yes somehow. You want to talk about a schizophrenic team? Started 5-3, won 7 in a row despite their star forward Dawson Garcia missing 3 games with a sprained left ankle. Then he gets healthy and they lose 4 in a row. Northwestern and Michigan State.
Yeah.
They had a 20-point second half lead on the road before blowing it at Iowa on Sunday. Fortunately, they got a chance to recover on Thursday when they head to a little school called Purdue. Howard transfer point guard Elijah Hawkins still leading the nation with 7.6 assists per game. They might want to consider benching their sophomore big man Farrell Payne at the end of close games. The only thing that is 38% shooting from the free throw line is causing pain.
Interesting with that game against Iowa, Dawson Garcia was held out for much of that second half also as well. I'm not sure if he was injured or if there was other reasons, but you saw what happened when he's held out. What happened? Iowa came storming back to win it.
So what's the excuse for the Missouri game?
Well,
Yeah.
it's Missouri. Um,
Yeah. Well, they were at home, so they couldn't focus.
I guess I mean, I don't know who else is. What other games are really worth discussing here from this week? Real quick though, I guess Greg's the other note was Northwestern had that nice win over Nebraska and followed up with a
Yeah.
home win over Penn State.
Yeah, I was going to say that Northwestern Nebraska game was big because I mean that both those teams are bubble issues. I think what they both need more than anything is road wins. Neither team all that strong. You just see Northwestern just 2-5 and Nebraska 1-7. I think they'll hold serve against Penn State, but the big game that's coming up is that Indiana game. They got to beat somebody away from home.
Yeah, well, they both have Indiana coming up on the road in the next week
Yeah.
here. Northwestern has to go to Rutgers though first, and that's coming up on Thursday night. And this Rutgers team 3-0 with Jeremiah Williams since he's been eligible, including the home win over Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's
I,
hard
I,
to win at Rutgers. I mean, even in years where they're not good, it's hard to win there.
I did say last week that Nebraska had a chance of winning 5 or 6 out of 7, and Northwestern was the one game that was the hiccup. This is what Titel opened the show with. Nebraska, it's in front of you, but you can't slip up. Nebraska, I think, will be fine. Yes, you need to get the road wins, but the road wins aren't tough road wins. Yeah, Rutgers included in that, unfortunately. But if you don't do it, that's the risk of being on that knife's edge. They are in Dayton right now. They cannot afford those slip-ups. They'll be favored in maybe every game remaining, but that means a slip-up is extra painful. I think they'll do it, though. I like this Nebraska team. I do think they'll do it.
Here's some of the key upcoming games this week. Minnesota at Purdue, probably over their heads.
Maybe. Great analysis, Chad.
Wisconsin at Iowa, Purdue at
game.
Ohio State. Northwestern's got that road game at Indiana, Rutgers at Minnesota. There's some interesting games definitely coming up this week.
But we also have to highlight Michigan State and Michigan. Spartans cannot afford to let that one slip.
They cannot. Good point, John.
Let's where do we want to go to? How about the Big 12 conference? Where as we record this, maybe we start with this because there's still about 8 minutes left in the game while we record this. Texas Tech is currently up 20. It just cut to 18 over Kansas. And once again, the Kansas Jayhawks almost showing that they are inept on the road, which is
they are.
Joby, it's just wild to see this Kansas team
now, this
bad on the road.
Well, and they are awful on the road. They're about to go to 2-5, but I actually think this is a scoring issue. McKellar's injury is a big deal. Flat out, Hunter Dickinson is not doing the job inside that you would want him to do, that he was brought aboard to do. Whether it's defenses handling him by keying on him because he doesn't have a threat that can score from another position. Kansas has trouble scoring right now. And when you're on the road, that's just a killer in the Big 12 in particular. I want to see what happens, with a fully loaded Kansas team. But without it, this is not, despite the fact that they are clearly a 2 or 3 seed right now, this is not a Final Four team if they cannot figure it out on the offensive end.
Yeah, they are absolutely struggling. Matt, one of the teams that is playing really well, including pick up road wins in this conference, is this Cyclones team. Iowa State up to number 10 in the polls, coming off a win at Texas, followed by a home win over TCU this week. I think this team is looking great right now, honestly.
And I think the difference is this year compared to the last couple, they've always been really good defensively. But this year, they're pretty decent at offense, 45th in efficiency, which, I mean, obviously probably not good enough to win a national title, but I think could be maybe a Final Four team because that defense is so good, number 3 in efficiency, and that caused turnovers. Really hard to, I think, game plan against at a short turnaround. So, yeah, both second-round game, Elite 8 game. There, I think, this is a dangerous team now. They've added some offense to go with their always great defense.
And Tytel, one of the teams they beat this week, the Texas Longhorns. I know you want to discuss them. I got them up in the right, and they are. I don't think it's until this weekend. They've got a huge game coming up though at Houston.
So the bad news for Coach Rodney Terry is that he has lost 3 of his past 5 games. The good news, the 3 opponents were BYU, Houston, and Iowa State, so no bad losses there. They crushed West Virginia by 36 last Saturday. They get the rest of this week off before heading to Houston for the rematch of their 4-point overtime loss last month. Max A. Smith, the transfer from Oral Roberts, continues to lead them in scoring with 18 a game. He's sitting on 29.86 for his career point total. He scored 20 last time out against the Cougars, so while Caitlin Clark is deservedly the big story this week in terms of career points, we got to send some props to Austin when A. Smith will probably become the 12th man in D1 history to score 3,000 points.
Sleeka, you know I got to do it to you. You love the Cincinnati Bearcats as much as Matt loves the Wisconsin Badgers. Again, this is another one of those teams that's just up and down. They picked up that nice win at Texas Tech, and we see right now what Kansas is doing at Texas Tech. But but then well, I guess it wasn't that awful to lose to Houston at home, and they were in the game, but it was a loss at the end of the day.
You know, I have to represent Cincinnati and not Cincinnati right here. But by the same token, the Bearcats have been a hard team to figure out every time we're ready to write them off. They win at Texas Tech, which I may remind you is blowing Kansas out right now. And they were also the first team that was able to win at BYU this year. But by the same token, getting off to the slow start against Houston, that's not going to be very helpful. And frankly, teams like Oklahoma and Texas, you've got to beat at least one of those 2 teams if you're going to make a serious case. Now, they will have the opportunity against Iowa State, but by the same token, once you get past that, they've got to beat both Central Florida and Oklahoma State because those are about as close to gimmies as you're going to get in this league, especially when you look at the brutal 4-game stretch that follows for them.
Griggs, I pulled up BYU on the right there, and can you tell me if this team is any good or not? Because I just don't know from what I've seen. I know their profile looks decent. They got a great net, but are they any good?
On January 16th, they were excellent. But then again, on a lot of other dates, they weren't. Are they any good? Yeah, sure, they are. I mean, I think they're safely inside the bubble. I think they're safely in the top half of the bracket. If you ask me if I think they're going past the first weekend, I would say no, but I still think they are profile-wise and on the court-wise a legit tournament caliber team. I don't, I think that they're going to kind of end up where they currently are by the time it's over.
Yeah, they did beat Kansas State after they lost at Oklahoma this week. There was just so many good games. There's so many games you can always circle in this conference here. I believe that TCU did finish off West Virginia tonight before we started the show. I'll quickly update. Yes, they did. As we mentioned, Kansas, Texas Tech. But look at the rest of this schedule here. Iowa State at Cincinnati, Oklahoma at Baylor, UCF at BYU, Texas at Houston, Kansas at Oklahoma, TCU at K-State, Cincinnati at UC, Iowa State at Houston, K-State at just circle them all, everybody. Don't bother. We can't even preview them all. We'll be here for 3 hours.
This Texas-Houston game, I mean, this can't just be the only time that they ever play again. They've got to keep this going after Texas goes to the SEC. It was just too awesome, the first game.
Over in the Pac-12 conference, Matt, I think the story of the week in the Pac-12 was the Utah Utes, and not in the good way. They played great against Arizona, triple overtime loss, and then they didn't bother coming out against Arizona State, apparently.
That's one of those like coaches speak. Don't let one bad loss become 2 or 3. They just did that, and then the Arizona at home is basically like losing 2 games. Pick it up. I believe that is a quad 3 loss. I do believe, correct?
Yes, it was.
So yeah, that's where
now swept by the Sun Devils. Ouch.
Yes, and I know conference record isn't on the team sheets of that, but man, I don't want to be bringing in an under 500 Pac-12 record to the table here, especially because I think it's a pretty strong bubble. So I'd advise them to make that 6 and 7. I think they do okay. Yeah, make that 6 and 7 become an 11 and 9.
Yeah, and 5 out of the last 7 on the road too. It's not going to be an easy stretch here. Joby, team going in the right direction by every metric is the Washington State Cougars. 5-game winning streak, including the road sweep of the Oregon teams this week.
I'll be the first to admit, I was slow to get on the Cougs bandwagon here. But now they are not just, they are one of the reasons why we talk about a strong bubble. They are a perfect example of it. But they are also one of these teams like Butler that we've discussed, like Virginia that we've discussed. I think they're joining the crowd of I can afford a loss. I can afford a loss and not just fall out of the tournament.
Well, it better not be one of the next two.
It might not be. Well, no, I think they can afford a Stanford loss, for instance.
Yeah.
Maybe not Cal, and they'd still be on most bracket sheets. They have to make up for it. They can't do it twice. The UCLA, et cetera. But this Washington State team is playing, as you point out, outstanding basketball right now. They've really found their rhythm. And here's what I love about it too is they've actually built up a resume. We talk about the Oregon schools sweeping, especially Oregon, the Beavers aren't much, but that Arizona win, even though it's at home, sorry, Griggs, it does count. That's an outstanding.
Oh, that one does. Yeah, that one does.
Yeah, that's an outstanding win against a team that is now on, a lot of one lines. When you look across, Washington State has a lot of room to grow because they've built a foundation. The Boise State win is a good win. That's a tournament team right now. As much as it pains me to say when we get to that conference, the fact of the matter is it's a resume that as long as they don't mess up at least more than once, this team could really surprise where they will be placed in the bracket, which could be even top half.
Titel, I pulled up the Stanford Cardinal on the left. I think you had a few thoughts on them.
I don't know if there's anybody in America with more tier 3 losses than Stanford, so they're not worth large.
Probably a Big Sky team.
Yeah.
Good news, they already beat UCLA and USC. The bad news, they already lost to UCLA and USC as well. Road trip this weekend to the Washington schools. Nice balanced scoring. 5 guys scoring between 11 and 16 a game. And there might not be a better freshman backcourt in the nation than Kanan Carlisle and Andrei Stojakovic, combining for 22 points a game, each shooting better than 35% behind the arc. And with tons of respect for Victor Wembanyama, there might not be a French basketball player with a more unique skill set than Maxime Reynaud. 7-1 center, averaging a double-double and shooting 43% behind the arc. Sacre bleu!
Jeez. I got this week's schedule up on the screen here after that one. I think we should just go to it. Utah, a huge week. They've got the Southern Cal road trip and round 1 of Arizona State, Arizona on Saturday as well. I know Titel will be glued to his TV screen as long as it's not on the Pac-12 network, which I don't think it will be, thankfully for everybody.
Now, Chad really wanted to annoy me. What's going to happen if UCLA wins their next 2 games against Colorado and Utah? Are we going to have to suddenly dig them out of blind resume hell?
They've got 4 very bad home losses on the bottom. They still don't have a quad 1 win, and neither of those games will be a quad 1 win, Sleeka. So they'd be a great team if you eliminate everything except for
the
quad
2 games they would win.
Yeah.
Utah. The story would be is if Utah loses that game, Utah all of a sudden they've been sliding. They were at one point a 5, 6. They're starting to slide like as teams. So Washington State's going up as Utah's coming down. Watch out. And if Utah loses to UCLA, that trend line will continue and will officially flip.
Before we go to the SEC, I'm actually going to skip ahead of conference here and go to the West Coast Conference first for a moment. And I'm doing that because of the matchup that happened in the non-conference matchup that happened in the West Coast involving a West Coast Conference and a SEC.
You're doing it because of the Gonzaga-Kentucky game.
The Gonzaga-Kentucky game.
Yes, there we go.
Titel, for the last few weeks, I kept saying, well, Gonzaga's got a decent profile if you throw in a win at Kentucky. And I think your comment to me was, do you really think they're going to win at Kentucky? Well, Titel, they really won at Kentucky. And we saw already the results of that. You have them in the field today.
Deservedly so. I do remember that conversation, and I'm glad that you're honest about it. The amazing part is that it's not like they did it by raining in threes. They were 4 of 18 behind the arc, but somehow they out-rebounded a taller and more athletic Kentucky team, and they still had more turnovers. Like, I still don't know how they did it. I mean, it didn't help that Kentucky also was 4 from behind the arc, and Kentucky had 10 blocks. Like, the stats don't make sense. It was just a combination of everybody's scoring. They got 12 points off the bench from the freshman Braden Huff, and Kentucky's bench was almost non-existent. So I think it might have been coaching. Not that Calipari ever gets out-coached by anybody, but I think Mark Few deserves a lot of credit.
Uh, the other team to discuss in this conference, Griggs, is the St. Mary's Gale team. 12 wins in a row, hottest team in the nation.
Well, yeah, one of the hottest.
One of the hottest, yeah.
And them in Virginia, and yeah, and again, a lot of those wins have come against teams that aren't really in the field, but they were still hard games to win, and to win 12 in a row and to be showing this kind of dominance. And when you look at the rest of their schedule, I certainly think
one
they're
road
good.
game.
Yeah,
One road game left. That's it.
one road
And
game,
it's
and I certainly
Pepperdine.
think they're good enough to win out, and I almost expect them to. And I know they've got Gonzaga at home for the last game of the season, but they've already won at Gonzaga. And while that was a great win, and while they looked really good on Saturday, I don't want to overreact or have recency bias. This is still a Gonzaga team that's been somewhat disappointing. And even with the Kentucky win, I still think St. Mary's looks better.
The upcoming schedule for this week in the WCC, Gonzaga's at Loyola Marymount and then hosting Pacific. St. Mary's is hosting Pepperdine, and that's their only game of the week. Obviously, any loss by either one of those teams in those games would be a major upset. But
Yeah.
let's jump over to the SEC where Kentucky suffered that loss. And Matt, let me ask you the Kentucky question here because I don't think this team has a top 25 profile, even though the voters do.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing that at this point either. And the other is the JNG is, but that I guess on the BPI has 24, but basically they're outside the top 25 in the metrics too. I'm not seeing it. They're playing the court isn't warranted. So like, especially normally the voted polls have some recency bias, and yet somehow Kentucky still skates by and still has a number next to them, even though nothing indicates by resume, by current play, by anything. I'd love to hear the argument how they're ranked because I'm not hearing it.
Well, let me throw this team over to Joby here also because your J&G has them at 23 and is very different from the other resume-based metrics.
Mhm.
Is there the name is Kentucky factor in the J&G?
No. The
I
reason
know, I'm
why
just
is,
joking.
Wilmington's not a tier 3 loss in my, in the J&G because they're actually that, so you can kind of push them up. So it's a no bad loss situation with a win against the team that's either a 1 or a 2 seed. And road win on Florida proves they can win on the road, and in Fayetteville they can win on the road. So that they've checked the box there, even if it's not a dominant road, situation, but they're 4-2 there. It's a solid 6 seed. That's what the J&G has them at. 6 seed. That I think that's about where Kentucky is. That they're, with top 25, that is, right now I'll take some of the teams we've lauded today. Virginia does not have a 6 seed resume. I think Kentucky does. To use Virginia's example that we've been praising today. Virginia doesn't have that win over North Carolina. If Virginia beats North Carolina, even at home in Charlottesville, yeah, they probably pass Kentucky. And so Kentucky, luckily for them, as you can see by their schedule, has opportunities. You beat Alabama at home, it doesn't matter to me. You beat Alabama, and while they're not number 5 in the country, they are a top 12 team. They are a 3 seed in my view. So Kentucky has the chance to move up, but then let's go. You all of a sudden slip up, at LSU. That's a bad loss right now that would sink them into the lower half of the field. But and be right where Matt is describing.
Kentucky, one of the issues, and we've watched this team all year, this team can't guard a tree. What is wrong with them defensively?
Then I hope they don't play Indiana State.
Wow, I walked right into that one.
It's either going to be
Sorry,
Stanford or
I had to go
Indiana
there.
State. Come on,
Let's move on. Titel, when we did our bracket rundown show last week, we had Tennessee as a 1 seed, just barely. In response to being declared by HoopsHD as a 1 seed, they went to Texas A&M and got their asses kicked. So, can any team for this conference be a 1 seed? Quite honestly, at this point,
The answer is no. That's why I didn't mention them at the start of the show, but just to quickly explain why. So they all have glaring problems. South Carolina's non-conference strength of schedule atrocious. Auburn, home court hero. Alabama, great team, but they got 7 losses already, although they're all good losses. Tennessee, if you look at the schedule, they would need a double miracle. So they finish up, as you can see, Auburn, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky. Then they'd probably have to face most of those teams again in the SEC tourney. If they win all of them, sure, they're a 1 seed. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah, not especially not the way they played at A&M, who Salika A&M, starting to slip, but I think with that Tennessee win and the win at Missouri this week, clearly righted their ship. Did we lose Salika?
I think we lost Salika.
Well, Chad, I'll
Okay.
jump in for Salika on that. A&M, when we talk about the 3 week ago time, where we said, Butler was in the 60s 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, A&M was actually on the top half of the bracket, knocking on a protected seed, and then went through a spell that dropped them. And had they lost the 2 games this week, they're out of the field. But instead, especially because of the Tennessee win, now they are back and they are steady. They scream right now to me 8-9 game the way they play.
Yeah.
And that's a buzz team. Let's be very honest. But they're a tournament team right now, and I think they'll they've stayed themselves to that. But will they approach protected seed level again, even with opportunities on their schedule to do it, like Tennessee, South Carolina? No.
Yes, short of the miracle that's Titel was mentioned for other teams of the win hours like that. Sleek, if we have you back, one last team to quickly address is Mississippi State, that finally got their first true road win, albeit at Missouri, but corrected at least that problem a little bit on their resume.
Well, you're checking one of the boxes right there. I would probably say LSU is going to be another winnable one, but that's not one they can take for granted. Nice. Obviously, you cannot be losing at home against Arkansas because that could be a potential backbreaker. And then you got the Egg Bowl coming up against Ole Miss in about a week's time.
An Ole Miss team that could really use that win as well after an 0-2 week. Matt, this Ole Miss team, I know they only have 5 losses, but there we go, another lousy non-conference strength of schedule, 321.
Yeah, I'd probably recommend for them to not be squarely on the bubble, because then that could be a disqualifier, that non-conference strength of schedule. Interestingly, despite that, they're very good in the 2 main resume metrics on the team sheet, the KPI and the strength of record. I kind of think that probably would sneak them in the field, but at the same time, it's one of those, they might get voted in and say like the 36 to 40 range, but then when we talk seeding time, all of a sudden you see they're a dated.
Yeah. Upcoming schedule here in the SEC, we've got
Ole
Miss at Kentucky. We've got South Carolina at
That's
Auburn.
a great
We will discuss the South Carolina game. That's another. Yeah, Texas A&M at Alabama, Kentucky at Auburn. A lot of good games in the SEC this week. So lots.
South Carolina up to 11th in the rankings, and I don't have a problem with that. This is a team that is very good.
Would you have believed me if I told you before the year South Carolina could end up being your regular season champions in the SEC?
Oh, I called it. I mean, it got deleted from the podcast, but I called it.
No, you called that they would win the bottom 4. Yeah,
100% understandable. I mean, losing at Bama and at Clemson in the state, in the state battle, you don't fault them for that, those two at all. Now, Georgia, different story.
Yeah. We're running a little late on time here, so we're gonna, Joby, you'll be glad that we're gonna do the Mountain West a little bit quickly tonight. I know I know it's one of your favorite conferences.
They're an underrated. They should have been on under the radar. If it weren't for Colorado State sneaking in, I would have lobbied for them.
Colorado State, the only team left in the polls. However, all 5 of these teams, the Boise State did not get votes in either poll. All the other 5 teams that we've been talking about all did get votes. And Griggs, it was a real nice week actually, I think, for Nevada, who was on their way out, and they went at Utah State and finish up follow up with an overtime home win over San Diego State.
Yeah, that is a huge week, and I think it completely changed the complexion of their profile. It certainly moved them up the J and G, and up most seed lists. So Nevada, I not only were they on their way out, I didn't have them anywhere close, but after a week like that, yeah, they're inside the bubble.
And also,
San Jose State and Coach Tim Miles continues to push the top of this league.
Also, Matt, Colorado State, a team that had been slipping lately, had a nice 2-0 week, including that win over Boise State, followed by crushing that lousy team from San Jose State.
Yeah, I think that solidifies them back to where, they're definitely wearing white in the first round. And then they probably have them or San Diego State are the ones I think, if you see one sneak up to like the 4 or 5 line, it'll be one of those two.
The only game of note here I would mention is New Mexico home loss to UNLV.
Oof. Yeah.
That one hurt, and we had this New Mexico team flying up the seed list. Now they're kind of flying down the seed list.
Well, we talked earlier about Arizona State getting a costly sweep against Utah. Add UNLV to getting a costly sweep against New Mexico. And oh, by the way, if those two teams should meet a third time, it's going to be at Thomas and Mack during the Mountain West tournament.
Yes. Here's the upcoming schedule. There are a bunch of good games here starting tomorrow night. Colorado State, San Diego State, and New Mexico,
Big one.
Nevada here
Yeah.
on Tuesday night. You also throw in New Mexico at San Diego State on Friday, Utah State at Colorado State on Saturday. So it's another. It's actually been fun that there's been a lot more interesting games in the Mountain West rather than just who's San Diego State playing, which
Right.
seems to be what happens every year before this year.
Well, New Mexico is a teetering situation because they're sliding. They were steady. They're on a precipice point if you look at the numbers, and they've got 2 games where they will be underdogs this week.
Yeah.
It could be a big week for Nevada to solidify, as Greg said, their spot in the field. New Mexico, if they lose both, which they will be expected to do, they very well may be out of the field at that point because the bubble is so strong.
The American Athletic Conference, a few things to note. First of all,
look at the first place team.
Matt, Florida Atlantic, tough loss at UAB, bounced back with a tough road overtime win at Wichita State, at least a 1-1 week for this FAU team. But every time you think of this team has started to put things together, it seems like they have a few slip-ups.
Yeah, it's man, not a good week to where even like that Wichita, it isn't quite a loss, but man, that did not help their metrics. And man, like they're playing their way right back into an 8-9 game.
If
Ty-
they're even there.
I want to ask you. Actually, hold on a second. You want to talk about SMU? Let's start there, and then we'll go to Memphis. First of all, SMU.
So Coach Rob Lanier, amazing turnaround. 10-22 last year, 17-7 at the moment this year. Double-digit wins away from home against West Virginia and Florida State. Single-digit losses to Wisconsin and Dayton. Final regular season, 7 games left. Probably going to lose when they head to FAU on February 22nd. The other 6 look very winnable. So here's their path. If they win the other 6 and lose to FAU, then they enter the tourney at 23-8. Maybe they face a Charlotte team in the semifinals who they already beat by double digits, and maybe FAU gets upset in the rematch with the UAB team they just lost to. There's a path.
Well, if FAU is getting upset, that path may be the automatic bid. Then is what you're almost saying.
I think they might win the tourney, which is ridiculous. They went 10-22 last year.
They may be one of the favorites to win this tournament, in fact, which is wild. But Joby, let me throw the Memphis Tigers over to you here. This was a team everyone had written off, but I got to tell you, they look good this week.
They look good
for the first time in a long time.
I'm wondering if it's too little, too late. They established themselves out of conference. You can see those nice. I mean, there are 3 tournament wins out of conference just sitting there, including a road win at that A&M team. We've complimented all 3 of those teams: A&M, Clemson, and Virginia. But the Rice win stands out. South Florida may be leading the conference, but I'm still not a believer. People don't realize that South Florida's in first place. UAB, Tulane's not that good. I mean, they're not really those aren't 2 tier 2 losses. Those, in my view, are more tier 3 when you have 100 in front of your name. The fact of the matter is they messed around at the wrong time in their conference. The good news for them is that because of those out of conference wins, if they go through the remainder of what is actually not an easy remaining schedule in the American, they can play their way back in.
At SMU and FAU, at SMU and Florida Atlantic twice, the opportunities are there.
Oh, the opportunities are there, but they needed. This isn't a case. If they didn't have those losses, those middle and bad loss to Rice, then you lose to Florida Atlantic. It's not a big deal. You're still in. You may not be a 6 seed anymore. You might be a 10 seed. Now they need those scalps, but the good news is they can get those scalps and that out of conference record, which is really impressive. When you really break it down, there's a reason why they were a 4 seed, I think, entering conference play. They have chances, and I think they will do it if they succeed, just getting some of those wins.
I will throw this out there, and our friend Rocco Miller pointed this out a week or two ago on the way the American built its conference schedule this week, this year. The teams that you played twice, they took the top half of the conference, the top 7 teams that were projected to be the top 7 team in the conference this year, and they were the ones that played each other twice. And the bottom 7 projected teams played each other twice, which means the South Florida and the Charlottes and the Lakes all were projecting that bottom half and had a lot easier conference schedules, which is maybe one of the reasons why we look at this screen here and see South Florida at the top of the conference. That being said, Amir Abdur-Rahim should be Conference Coach of the Year, hands down, in South Florida.
Absolutely. And can we pull their profile up again, Chad? I know you had it up there. I don't
twice now. That's how impressed I am with what he's.
That's how impressive it is, and it's like blind resume left or right. I don't think this is a tournament caliber profile. The net is oof. But when you look at some of the Tier 4 losses, Maine and Central Michigan, but this is a team that since the end of February, or since the end of November, has just been on fire. And it took them a little bit of time to get there, but they're there. Tytel mentioned SMU, and he's right. I think South Florida might have a path via the auto bid, the way they're playing. They won at Memphis. I mean, and that's a team that we all kind of like. And Florida Atlantic is going to play up or down to whoever they're playing. I mean, if we've learned anything about them this year, it's that they can beat UConn at UConn and then lose at home to Mississippi Valley.
Here's the upcoming schedule of the American. Florida Atlantic is hosting Temple and then going to South Florida. Interesting game Sunday. I actually circled that one, FAU at South Florida. That's a first place battle. And Memphis with that Texas road trip at North Texas at SMU. Those are probably the games. Real quick through the Atlantic 10 here. Dayton suffered a tough road loss to VCU in an ugly 49-47 game. Coming off of a game where they scored 94 at St. Joe's. So, Matt, can you figure out this Dayton team when they score 94 and then they score 47?
I think Anthony Grant might have let Tom Crean take over for the weekend. That is something a Tom Crean team could do, is score 91 game and go about 45 the next. But no, that's crazy to where, I guess, St. Joe's enough possessions, they were offensive rhythm, and then VCU dragged the game in the mud, and they couldn't get out of it, and there you go. You lost one, you knocked yourself, I think, out of protected seed range, and that's what I'd kind of be surprised to see them mentioned on Saturday as a protected seed there. So that's one. They're still not bad. They're still like a 5 or 6, but it's hurting. They've gone down to where there were 3 or 4 a couple weeks ago, and it's slowly fading to where take 1 or 2 more losses, and you might be in danger of not wearing white in the first round.
Joby, on Dayton.
Well, what's interesting, Matt, is there's still the 16 on the seed line, the bracket matrix, but I do agree. I think they'll slip as more of those brackets come in. But the interesting component to me on this was that in the AP poll, they actually went up a spot. They went from 17 to 16. Now, that's because teams like Wisconsin fell hard and other. But come on. I mean, I love the Flyers this season, and they're definitely a good team. You lose to VCU, you deserve to drop.
Oh, no. Stop.
I mean,
stop. Oh, my God. Oh, make it. Oh, no.
Real quick, no. Richmond now in first place.
Dayton is going to sue us for playing that, and I am going to be a witness for them against myself.
VCU, I'll just throw this out there. VCU, with that win over Dayton, they get another game at Dayton 10 this season. They also have a game at Richmond. It may take a win out, but they could get half a look at this point. Tytel, would you agree with me? Again, I'm assuming you literally win every game on this remaining schedule for this VCU team.
What's amazing
probably take a regular season title also. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to focus on the Tier 4 because, like, I remember when GW was like 14-3 and I was thinking they were going to win this all. GW was like falling off a cliff. So that loss, there's a reason that a team that was 14-3 is now a Tier 4 loss. It's because they are not looking too revolutionary. And Norfolk State, like, you just can't lose to a team from that conference even by 3.
That's a tournament loss. Come on. They're in the field.
Tournament,
They're the MEAC champion.
Maybe Norfolk's in the field. DCU is not.
Okay.
it's an in-state rivalry.
One other team we do want to quickly mention. We mentioned the trees a minute ago, thanks to Griggs. Salika, Indiana State in the top 25 polls, 23 in the AP, 24 in the coaches poll. Welcome to the trees, to the Hoops HD report, and back to the top 25 for the first time in a very, very long time.
And if you want to know how very long that was, it was the 1978-1979 team when they had some guy named Larry Bird on there, and the Trees actually made it to #1 in the polls before losing in the title game to Michigan State that year. Now, granted, Indiana State's had a couple tournament teams since then, even a few tournament wins, but their first top 25 appearance since then.
Let's see if they can still be here next week. They should be Illinois State, but it's not an easy road trip to Southern Illinois, Griggs, on the
No,
weekend game.
I think the Southern Illinois game is their hardest remaining game, and it is hard to win there. I mean, the Salukis are tough at home. I think they'll do it. I think they will win out. I think they're good enough to do it, and they've shown it so far. But that probably is their toughest remaining contest. Now, if they win out, I think they're in on the first ballot, even if they don't get out of even if they lose their first quarterfinal game. I think they're in on the first ballot.
If they do that, I mean, Joey, this team is going to be probably about 15th in the nation, and they should be at the top half of the bracket, shouldn't they?
I don't think if they lose to a bad team, they're going to be first ballot. They're in.
Yeah.
They barely escaped Missouri State, so they actually were on the ropes and should have lost that game. But yeah,
Missouri State tough too is a road game.
I mean, but road game gets 120. But this team right now is a 10 seed and on the way up. They could continue to pile up, just like we've seen St. Mary's. People, and St. Mary's is more of a household name. We've seen St. Mary's climb to 7 or 8. I think Indiana State, if they continue to win, get another win or two against Drake in the tournament, Drake and Bradley, however that shakes out in the tournament schedule, they could they have a shot at maybe an 8 or above. But they need to win out to do that.
On that note, that does complete the show. I do want to move over to final thoughts. And Titel, I know you need the screen share, so I'll start with you.
So we already talked about the Mountain West standings, but I just want to go back to it. I'm not going to recap everybody's great points, but just look at the standings. So we got Utah State at top with 8-3, 6 other teams at 6-4, 7-4, all bunched up. Each of the top 5 all made the cut in my most recent bracket. The 6th team, Nevada, was one of my first 4 out, and the 7th team, UNLV, as Stalika mentions, their home court is where the conference tourney will be held at the Thomas and Mack. 4 of the last 5 MWC title games have featured San Diego State against Utah State. Could it be 5 out of 6? Sure, they're both great. But could they also both lose in the quarterfinals? Sure they could. There's so much talent in the league this year. Even if it's not the talent that Joby likes, it is talent, and it's going to be an amazing conference tournament.
Really, you got to win that regular season title in the Mountain West so that you can at least have the only easy quarterfinal game in this conference tournament. Which is amazing to say. Joby.
Is interesting. We've said this, and I agree with the statement that this is one of the strongest, but we always complain about the bubble. This year we haven't. The bubble looks great, but there's an interesting thing on the bubble that I have never seen before. Let me reel off 7 numbers real quick. 323, 266, 324, 301, 321, 328, 296. Of the bottom of that is the out of conference schedules for half of the bubble. And so
you're going to say half of the Big 12.
Well, 300 conference out of conference schedule. That's a disqualifier. Not when you're competing against another team with a 300 out of conference schedule. And so that's a unique component that we should be looking ahead to, because you're right. That is a disqualifier. How many disqualifiers will there be is the question.
Matt.
All right, man, so there must be something in the blood at Marquette. Because, man, if you thought Shaka Smart had the worst court infraction this year earlier for coaches, Buzz Williams outdid him on Saturday, running basically 2 half-court almost to the tip circle, trying to call a timeout in a game he had clearly in control. So, man, that must be something in the water there in Milwaukee.
That was a heck of a one. Slika.
You've obviously never seen Sean Woods during a Southern game where he could practically be setting a screen. But as far as my final thoughts, I want to focus on a couple of streaks in the SEC through this weekend. Number one, Kentucky, who lost their third straight home game. We have not seen that streak of futility since the late 1960s when Adolph Rupp was still coaching. And needless to say, this was in the pre-Rupp era, Rupp Arena era. And then the second one, while Florida had a win against Auburn where the margin was a little surprising, keep in mind this was the 15th consecutive win by the Gators at home against Auburn. I don't remember the exact year, but that's got to be like the early Billy Donovan era, the last time the Gators would have lost at home to the Tigers.
Wow.
That's
Greg,
crazy.
Greg, do you want to finish off the show?
Yeah, some of the like we mentioned earlier, to start off, some of the teams that are streaking up. I'm really impressed with how Virginia's playing. I think they could end up way up in the seed list by the time they're done. Butler, I also think is being a little bit undervalued, but if they are, they've got the chance to prove me right this week. Teams have had the chance to prove me right before and failed to do it. Hopefully, they can make me look smart.
On that note, and I don't know it's going to be difficult for anybody to make Griggs look smart, but on that note, I do want to thank everybody for joining us. On behalf of David Griggs and John Teitel up here, Joby Fortune below me, Matt Zakowski, and John Stalika, I'm Chad Sherwood. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again Wednesday night with an Under the Radar, Thursday with a bracket rundown. Talk to you real soon.